1945, as America celebrated victory in Europe, 6 American civilians died on continental U.S. soil due to a Japanese weapon that had traveled 6,000 miles across the Pacific without a pilot, fuel, or electronic guidance. This was not a conventional bomb, nor a traditional air attack, but the culmination of one of World War II's most audacious and technologically advanced military campaigns. A pregnant woman and 5 children in an Oregon forest became the only fatal victims of enemy action on American continental territory throughout the entire war, killed by a weapon that defied all military conventions of the era. The Fugo project represented history's first successful attempt at automated intercontinental warfare, anticipating the concept of intercontinental ballistic missiles by decades. Even more disturbingly, the American government orchestrated such an effective media blackout that most Americans remained ignorant about these attacks for years after the war's end, creating a controversial precedent regarding wartime censorship that resonates to this day. During the winter of 1944, Japanese engineers finalized calculations for a weapon that seemed straight out of science fiction. Using only rice paper, potato glue, and hydrogen, they created 33-foot diameter balloons capable of carrying incendiary bombs across the planet's vastest ocean. The concept defied conventional military logic. How could an island nation, with limited resources and under severe naval blockade, directly attack American territory? The answer lay in a recent meteorological discovery about high-altitude air currents circling the globe. The Japanese had identified the jet stream, a river of wind at 30,000 feet altitude that flowed consistently from Japan towards North America at speeds of up to 200 miles per hour. This discovery transformed the Earth's atmosphere into a free military highway, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. While Americans invested billions in the Manhattan Project, the Japanese developed their own weapon of mass destruction for a fraction of the cost, using technology that any paper factory could reproduce. Major General Curtis LeMay, commander of American bombing operations in the Pacific, received the first reports of unidentified flying objects over American territory with deep skepticism. Military pilots reported sightings of spherical white structures floating at altitudes impossible for conventional aircraft. Initially, intelligence officers classified these reports as combat hallucinations or enemy propaganda. The reality was much more alarming. Japan had achieved what no military power had attempted before, attacking an entire continent using only wind and gravity. On November 3, 1944, the first Fugo balloon was launched from Ichinomiya Beach, carrying 2 33-pound incendiary bombs and one 26-pound anti-personnel bomb. The device ascended silently through the atmospheric layers, disappearing into the darkness eastward. Within 72 hours, American radar systems detected unidentified objects over Alaska, marking the beginning of a campaign that would last 5 months and secretly terrorize the American military command. Colonel Sigmund Freud, an Army Air Force intelligence officer, not related to the psychoanalyst, coordinated the American response to the first sightings when he noticed a disturbing pattern in the reports. The objects consistently appeared during specific weather conditions, following routes that perfectly coincided with high-altitude wind current maps. In December 1944, when the first intact balloon was recovered in Montana, analysis revealed a technical sophistication that surprised American experts. The altitude control system used sandbags as ballast. These were automatically released by an aneroid barometer mechanism when the balloon descended below 30,000 feet. When it ascended too high, an automatic valve released hydrogen to maintain optimal altitude. This primitive but effective autopilot system allowed the balloons to maintain cruising altitude for consecutive days without human intervention. Even more impressively, the Japanese had mathematically calculated the transcontinental flight time with precision. Exactly 60 hours from the Japanese coast to the American west coast, with a margin of error of less than 10%. Dr. Charles Munger, a meteorologist at the University of Chicago, was secretly recruited by the Pentagon to analyze the technical feasibility of the balloon attacks. His calculations confirmed the military strategist's nightmare. Under ideal conditions, Japanese balloons could reach any point in the continental United States including cities on the East Coast. The jet stream functioned as a free and undetectable military transport system, operating 24 hours a day regardless of war conditions. Munger discovered that the Japanese had identified specific meteorological windows when the jet stream intensified, allowing speeds of up to 250 miles per hour and reducing the crossing time to less than 48 hours. During these periods, a balloon launched from Tokyo could theoretically reach New York in 3 days. The strategic implication was terrifying. If the Japanese could miniaturize chemical or biological weapons to fit into the balloons, they could attack American population centers without warning. The very concept of American territorial security, protected by 2 oceans, had been permanently compromised by a meteorological discovery and Japanese ingenuity. Lieutenant Robert Meiksch, a fighter pilot based in Oregon, received extraordinary orders in January 1945, intercept and destroy hostile flying objects over American territory without asking questions about their origin or purpose. During his first interception mission, Meiksch spotted a Fugo balloon serenely floating at 25,000 feet, seemingly harmless against the blue sky of the Pacific Northwest. When he opened fire with his .50 caliber machine guns, the balloon exploded in an orange fireball that illuminated the landscape for miles. The explosion was so violent that fragments of burnt paper rained down on farms over a 10-square-mile area. Meiksch later reported that the experience was surreal and terrifying, destroying an enemy weapon over American soil, something no American pilot had experienced since the War of 1812. Even more disturbingly, he realized that for every balloon intercepted, dozens more probably passed unnoticed through the vast American airspace. America, for the first time in over a century, was under direct attack on its own territory, and the civilian population remained completely ignorant of this reality. In February 1945, FBI agents began investigating reports of mysterious explosions in remote forests of the American West. Forest Ranger Jack Morrison discovered the first conclusive physical evidence when he found fragments of rice paper with Japanese characters in a 15-foot diameter crater in Washington. Forensic analysis revealed that the paper had been treated with a special chemical substance that made it resistant to moisture and freezing at high altitudes. More alarmingly, the fragments contained traces of white phosphorus, indicating that the bombs were specifically designed to start large-scale forest fires. Morrison realized that if the attacks had occurred during the dry summer season, instead of the humid winter, the American West could have faced an unprecedented ecological catastrophe. Entire forests could have been consumed simultaneously, creating a smokescreen that would paralyze war production on the West Coast. The Japanese's timing choice, launching during the winter when forests were humid, revealed a critical flaw in their strategy, but also demonstrated how close they came to causing mass devastation. Dr. Eleanor Patterson, a psychological warfare expert from the War Department, analyzed the true objective of the balloon attacks and reached a disturbing conclusion. Physical damage was secondary to the intended psychological impact. The Japanese had designed a terror campaign that would exploit America's geographical vastness against itself. With 9,000 balloons launched randomly over a 3 million square mile territory, each explosion would create a fear zone hundreds of square miles wide. American citizens would begin to question if their own homes were safe, if their children could play outdoors, if the war had finally reached American territory. Patterson calculated that even with a success rate of just 3%, the balloons could create a state of national anxiety that would undermine civilian morale and war production. The most insidious aspect was unpredictability. Unlike conventional air attacks that targeted specific military objectives, the balloons could hit anywhere, at any time, transforming the entire American territory into a potential combat zone. This was history's first attempt at intercontinental psychological warfare, anticipating modern terrorist tactics by decades. In March 1945, Secretary of War Henry Stimson faced an unprecedented dilemma in American military history: how to respond to enemy attacks on American soil without causing mass panic. The solution was radical and controversial: a complete media blackout on the balloon attacks. Stimson ordered all newspapers, radio stations, and magazines to be prohibited from mentioning any aspect of the Japanese balloons under penalty of treason charges. The official justification was to deny the Japanese information about the effectiveness of their attacks, but declassified documents decades later revealed more complex motivations. The government feared that reports of the attacks could inspire domestic saboteurs or cause mass evacuations of rural areas, harming agricultural production essential for the war effort. More controversially, some officials argued that censorship was necessary to maintain the illusion of American invulnerability that sustained national morale. This decision set a dangerous precedent regarding the government's power to suppress information of public interest during national crises, a debate that remains relevant in the modern era. Byron Miksch, younger brother of pilot Robert, worked as a radar operator on the Oregon coast when he detected what he initially thought was a formation of Japanese bombers approaching the American coast. The objects moved at a consistent speed of 180 miles per hour, at an altitude of exactly 30,000 feet, maintaining perfect formation for consecutive hours. When interceptor fighters were dispatched, pilots reported finding no aircraft, only bright spherical objects that seemed to float without visible propulsion. Miksch realized he was witnessing a new form of warfare, automated attacks that required no pilots, fuel, or advanced bases. The Japanese had essentially transformed the atmosphere itself into a weapon, using natural forces to transport explosives across intercontinental distances. This realization was deeply disturbing for radar operators accustomed to tracking conventional aircraft with predictable signatures. The balloons represented a phantom threat, present, but almost impossible to consistently intercept due to their passive nature and unpredictably variable trajectories dependent on constantly changing weather conditions. Captain James Wheeler, an Army Corps of Engineers demolition expert, was assigned to analyze the detonation mechanisms of the Fugo balloons after several successful recoveries. His analysis revealed a technical sophistication that rivaled the best American weapon systems. The Japanese had developed a timed release system that functioned independently of extreme environmental conditions, temperatures of 60 degrees at high altitudes, variable atmospheric pressures, and extreme humidity. The mechanism used a combination of barometric fuses and mechanical timers that ensured detonation, even if the balloon remained airborne for weeks. Wheeler discovered that each balloon carried 3 different types of bombs: 2 thermite incendiary bombs designed to start forest fires, and 1 fragmentary anti-personnel bomb intended to kill anyone investigating the wreckage. This combination revealed the Japanese intention to maximize both material damage and civilian casualties. More disturbingly, Wheeler calculated that if the Japanese had access to radioactive materials or chemical agents, the balloons could have dispersed lethal contamination over vast areas of American territory, creating permanent exclusion zones. Dr. Sarah Chen, a Chinese-born meteorologist secretly working for the American Countermeasure Project, made a discovery that fundamentally changed military understanding of the balloon attacks. Analyzing historical wind patterns, Chen realized that the Japanese had identified not only the jet stream, but also specific seasonal variations that maximized attack precision. During certain atmospheric conditions, the balloons followed wind corridors as predictable as commercial air routes, allowing the Japanese to target specific regions of the United States with surprising accuracy. Chen discovered that launches during new moons, when atmospheric conditions were more stable, resulted in concentrations of balloons over West Coast industrial areas, with a frequency statistically impossible to be a coincidence. The Japanese were not simply launching balloons randomly. They had developed a meteorological targeting system that transformed natural phenomena into military guidance systems. This discovery implied that future hostile powers could use advanced meteorological knowledge for precision attacks using relatively primitive technology, anticipating concepts of asymmetric warfare by decades. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Murphy, a liaison officer between military command and civilian authorities, coordinated the response to increasing reports of mysterious explosions in rural communities of the West. Murphy faced an impossible paradox: how to protect civilians from a threat that officially did not exist. He developed a system of special weather alerts that instructed rural communities to report unusual atmospheric phenomena without mentioning enemy attacks. Volunteer firefighters received secret training on explosive devices of unknown origin, disguised as industrial emergency preparedness exercises. Murphy realized he was orchestrating one of the most elaborate domestic disinformation operations in American history, protecting civilians through well-intentioned lies. The irony was profound. While American soldiers fought for freedom and democracy abroad, the American government was systematically deceiving its own population about enemy attacks on national soil. Murphy questioned whether this approach was morally justifiable, but recognized that revealing the truth could cause mass panic that would harm more lives than the attacks themselves. In April 1945, American intelligence analysts intercepted Japanese communications that revealed the true scale of the Fugo operation. Decoded documents indicated that Japan had planned to launch up to 15,000 additional balloons, equipped with experimental biological weapons, including anthrax spores and bubonic plague bacteria cultivated in secret military laboratories. Unit 731, infamous for medical experiments on prisoners, had developed miniaturized versions of its biological weapons specifically for the Fugo balloons. Only the deterioration of the Japanese military situation and Allied bombings of production facilities prevented this catastrophic escalation. If implemented, this plan would have transformed the balloons from a military curiosity into an existential threat to the American population. Entire cities could have been evacuated, American agriculture devastated, and the war effort compromised by artificial epidemics. The discovery of this Japanese intention retroactively justified many of the extreme security measures implemented by the American government, but also revealed how close America came to facing history's first intercontinental biological warfare campaign. Sergeant William Hayes, an explosive ordnance disposal expert, was called to investigate a disturbing report from a picnicking family in Oregon who had found a strange object in the forest. On May 5, 1945, Hayes arrived at the Bly, Oregon area, where Elsie Mitchell, wife of a local pastor, had organized a picnic with 5 church children. The group had discovered what appeared to be a large white balloon entangled in the trees, with metallic objects suspended by ropes. When Hayes arrived at the scene, he found a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 6 bodies scattered within a 50-foot radius around the wreckage of a Fugo balloon. Elsie Mitchell, 5 months pregnant, and 5 children between 11 and 14 years old, had been killed instantly when one of the anti-personnel bombs detonated. Hayes realized he was witnessing the first, and only, deaths of American civilians by enemy action on continental territory throughout the entire Second World War. The irony was devastating. After years of global war, America had lost its virginity of territorial invulnerability not through a massive invasion or strategic bombing, but by a simple weapon carried by the wind. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, scientific director of the Manhattan Project, was secretly informed about the Bly incident and its implications for American national security. Oppenheimer perceived a disturbing symmetry. While America developed history's most destructive weapon in ultra-secret laboratories, Japan had managed to attack American territory using technology that any high school student could understand. The simplicity of the Fugo balloons contrasted dramatically with the complexity of the atomic bomb, but both represented revolutionary leaps in military capability. Oppenheimer calculated that if the Japanese had access to fissile materials, a single balloon carrying an improvised atomic bomb could devastate an American city without warning. This terrifying possibility influenced his decision to accelerate the development of the atomic bomb. America needed to end the war before Japan could refine its intercontinental attack techniques. The race was not just to develop nuclear weapons, but to use them before the enemy could transform simple technology into delivery systems for weapons of mass destruction. Colonel Paul Tibbets, the pilot who would later command the Enola Gay, was assigned to lead an ultra-secret reconnaissance mission over Japanese balloon production facilities. Aerial photographs revealed a massive industrial operation involving thousands of civilian workers, mainly women and children, producing balloons in schools, temples, and gymnasiums converted into factories. Tibbets realized he was observing a total mobilization of Japanese society for intercontinental warfare. Each balloon represented hundreds of hours of meticulous manual labor by civilians, who probably did not fully understand the purpose of their efforts. The production facilities were deliberately dispersed and camouflaged, making precision bombings extremely difficult without causing massive civilian casualties. This discovery presented a complex moral dilemma: how to destroy enemy production capacity without massacring civilian workers, many of whom were children forced to work. Tibbets recognized that the Japanese had transformed their own civilian population into human shields to protect a military operation, anticipating tactics that would become common in modern asymmetric conflicts. Major General Leslie Groves, military director of the Manhattan Project, received intelligence reports indicating that Japanese scientists were experimenting with radioactive materials recovered from uranium mines in occupied Korea. The possibility of dirty bombs carried by Fugo balloons represented a strategic nightmare that could render vast areas of American territory uninhabitable for decades. Groves ordered an urgent analysis of the feasibility of radioactive contamination via balloons, discovering that even relatively small amounts of radioactive material could contaminate extensive urban areas if efficiently dispersed. The threat was not nuclear explosion, but long-term contamination that would force permanent evacuations and destroy public confidence in American territorial security. This possibility dramatically accelerated the Manhattan Project's timeline. Groves realized that America needed to demonstrate absolute nuclear superiority before Japan could develop alternative delivery methods for radioactive weapons. The nuclear race was not just about who would develop the bomb first, but about who could use it to end the war before new forms of intercontinental warfare became a reality. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of American naval forces in the Pacific, faced a disturbing strategic revelation when intelligence analysts calculated the cost-benefit of the Japanese balloon attacks. Each balloon cost approximately $6 to produce, while American countermeasures, air patrols, radar systems, interception personnel, cost thousands of dollars per intercepted balloon. The Japanese had discovered a form of asymmetric warfare that forced Americans to spend disproportionate resources defending a territory impossible to fully protect. Nimitz realized that even if only 1% of the balloons caused significant damage, the operation would be economically viable for Japan while bleeding American resources. This dynamic anticipated principles of asymmetric warfare that would become central in 21st century conflicts: how smaller forces could use simple technology and creativity to neutralize conventional military advantages of superpowers. The lesson was clear: technological superiority and massive resources did not guarantee protection against enemies willing to use unconventional methods and accept seemingly low success rates. Dr. Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, coordinated efforts to develop technological countermeasures against the Fugo balloons when he realized a revolutionary implication of the Japanese campaign. The balloons represented the first practical demonstration of autonomous weapon systems, devices that could navigate, select targets, and attack without direct human control after launch. Bush recognized that the Japanese had inadvertently demonstrated the concept of military drones decades before the necessary electronic technology existed. The balloon's barometric altitude control system was essentially a primitive mechanical computer that made tactical decisions based on environmental conditions. This insight influenced the post-war development of guidance systems for ballistic missiles and eventually led to modern military drone programs. Bush realized that warfare was evolving towards automated systems that would reduce the importance of human numerical superiority, anticipating fundamental transformations in the nature of military conflict that would fully manifest only in the 21st century. Lieutenant General Henry Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, faced a crisis of confidence when he realized that American air superiority, considered absolute after years of dominance over European and Pacific skies, had been compromised by 18th century technology. Balloons, invented by the Montgolfier brothers in 1783, were penetrating American air defenses that cost billions of dollars to develop. Arnold ordered a complete review of air defense doctrines, discovering that systems designed to intercept high-speed aircraft were inadequate against slow, small, and passive targets. P-51 Mustang fighters, capable of 440 miles per hour, had difficulty intercepting balloons moving at 180 miles per hour due to the difference in maneuverability and minimal radar signature. This discovery forced a fundamental reevaluation of vulnerabilities in American territorial defense and influenced the post-war development of multi-layered air defense systems capable of dealing with threats of varied speeds and altitudes. Arnold realized that advanced military technology created blind spots that creative enemies could exploit using seemingly obsolete methods. Colonel William Blanchard, an intelligence officer responsible for evaluating the effectiveness of censorship regarding the Foucault balloons, discovered that the media blackout had been surprisingly successful, perhaps excessively so. Secret surveys indicated that less than 5% of the American population was aware of the balloon attacks, even in areas where explosions had occurred. This almost complete ignorance created a paradoxical situation. American civilians were safer due to their ignorance, but also more vulnerable because they did not know how to react to discoveries of suspicious devices. Blanchard documented at least 12 incidents where civilians found intact balloons and handled them dangerously, unaware that they were enemy weapons. Censorship had protected national morale but also prevented public safety education that could have saved lives. This tension between security through ignorance versus security through knowledge established controversial precedents regarding governmental transparency during national crises. Blanchard questioned whether a democracy could function effectively when the government systematically concealed national security threats from its own citizens. Dr. Theodor von Karman, a Hungarian-American aerodynamics expert, analyzed the technical aspects of the Foucault balloons and reached conclusions that revolutionized the understanding of meteorological warfare. Von Karman discovered that the Japanese had essentially hacked the global climate system, using advanced scientific knowledge to transform natural phenomena into weapon systems. The jet stream, only recently discovered by meteorologists, had been weaponized with mathematical precision that rivaled the best guidance systems of the time. Von Karman calculated that under ideal conditions, the balloons could hit specific targets with 50-mile accuracy, extraordinary for a system that relied entirely on natural forces. This discovery implied that future wars could involve manipulation of natural systems, weather, ocean currents, magnetic fields, as strategic weapons. Von Karman realized that the Japanese had inadvertently demonstrated principles of environmental warfare that would become relevant decades later, when advanced technology would allow deliberate modification of weather patterns for military purposes. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, a World War I aviation ace serving as a military consultant, was assigned to assess the psychological impact of the balloon attacks on American pilots. Rickenbacker discovered that many pilots experienced a unique form of combat anxiety, fear of an invisible and unpredictable enemy that could appear anywhere, at any time. Unlike conventional aerial combat, where pilots faced human adversaries in similar machines, the balloons represented a phantom threat that defied combat instincts developed through years of training. Pilots reported nightmares about ghosts in the sky and developed obsessive radar-checking behaviors. Rickenbacker realized that the Japanese had inadvertently created a new form of psychological warfare that exploited primitive fears about invisible and uncontrollable threats. This discovery influenced the post-war development of military training techniques to deal with asymmetric and unconventional threats that did not conform to traditional combat patterns. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Pacific, received intelligence reports indicating that the limited success of the Foucault balloons had inspired other Axis countries to develop similar systems. Germans were experimenting with high-altitude balloons to attack England, while Italians considered smaller versions for attacks in the Mediterranean. MacArthur realized that the Japanese had inadvertently initiated a new era of weapon proliferation, Simple and inexpensive technology that any nation could reproduce and adapt for its own strategic needs. The threat was not just the Japanese balloons, but the possibility that dozens of countries could develop variations of the technology for regional conflicts. MacArthur ordered an urgent analysis of how to prevent the proliferation of intercontinental attack technologies, recognizing that the era of geographical security based on oceanic distance had permanently ended. Future wars would involve threats that could come from any direction, at any time, using technology accessible to virtually any determined adversary. Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, after witnessing the first atomic bomb test in Alamogordo, reflected on the historical irony of the Japanese balloon attacks. While America had invested $2 billion in the Manhattan Project to develop history's most complex weapon, Japan had attacked American territory using technology that cost less than a tank of gasoline per unit. Oppenheimer realized that technological sophistication was not necessarily proportional to military effectiveness. Creativity and understanding of enemy vulnerabilities could be more valuable than massive resources. This lesson influenced his post-war perspective on nuclear proliferation and international security. If a defeated nation could attack the world superpower using paper and hydrogen, what future threats could emerge from unexpected combinations of scientific knowledge and determination? Oppenheimer recognized that the nuclear era would not eliminate asymmetric threats, but would potentially make them more devastating. True national security would require vigilance against both obvious threats and enemy creativity that could transform mundane technology into strategic weapons. In August 1945, when the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, American intelligence officials discovered documents that revealed the true extent of Japanese plans for the Fugo balloons. Secret facilities were developing second-generation balloons with tripled cargo capacity, rudimentary guidance systems based on magnetic compasses, and payloads that included not only explosives, but also psychological propaganda and chemical warfare agents. Japan had planned a 6-month campaign that would culminate in the simultaneous launch of 50,000 balloons during ideal weather conditions in the fall of 1945. If implemented, this attack would have represented the largest bombing in history, not for its intensity, but for its geographically impossible to defend distribution. American cities from the West Coast to the Midwest would have faced simultaneous attacks that would completely overwhelm emergency response systems. The Japanese surrender after Hiroshima and Nagasaki prevented this escalation, but captured documents revealed how close America came to facing a form of total warfare that defied all conventional military doctrines. Decades after the war's end, when documents about the Fugo balloons were finally declassified, historians discovered that the American government had systematically underestimated both the technical sophistication and the psychological impact of the Japanese campaign. Archives revealed that at least 1,000 balloons had reached American territory, much more than the 300 officially recognized during the war. Many had fallen in remote areas where they were never discovered, while others were secretly recovered by military authorities and classified to prevent public panic. The true extent of Japanese penetration into American airspace remained hidden for 30 years, creating an incomplete historical narrative that minimized one of World War II's most innovative military campaigns. This revelation raised disturbing questions about how many other enemy military operations might have been concealed from the American public during and after the war. The precedent set by the Fugo balloons, governmental censorship of enemy attacks on American soil, resonates in contemporary debates about transparency, national security, and the public's right to know threats to its security.